You are the Vanguard. When your team is afraid, you jump into battle and you teleport to the heart of enemy lines and you punish them for existing in your space. When they smarten up and try to run away, you pursue them and you burst them down because you take no survivors while your team catches up behind you. You lead the way and you finish the enemy. Or maybe you're the other Vanguard who likes to jump into combat to rescue your teammates, deal some big damage, and then escape with your team, reinforce them for round 2. If this is your playstyle, then this build is for you. I get a lot of questions on the gear, so let's start there. The gear, I would recommend for anyone starting this build, start with Marauder. Using the Marauder pieces, it should give you enough stats to be able to sustain on your own, and also give you enough damage to do burst that can down an enemy in a single hit. Now, something to keep in mind is you do want to get your damage probably close to around 2500, and you also want to get your defense at around 2700, so you're not walking glass. With the recent changes in Guardian, we lost retaliation, and retaliation was a very nice boon because while you're waiting for your cooldowns to come back and someone's hitting you, the retaliation dealt some counter pressure. In today's world, being a core guardian, if you're not doing damage, you are taking damage. So in the traits in a minute, you're going to see all the damage modifiers that I've added in order for it to work. Trinkets themselves, I have a mix here. I have some Marauder pieces. I have some mixtures of traits that give me a little bit of ferocity, vitality, power, and a little bit of boon duration. And the whole reason why is because a lot of your damage comes from resolution, which is kind of one of the dependencies that give you higher damage modifiers. So with that in mind, let's also talk about the weapons. The weapons, I've got a little bit of a mix as well too. With Cobalt, I use a Zerker. I use Zerker stats for this one. And I use Sigil of Rage because as soon as you crit, and in this build you'll crit a lot, you gain quickness while you're hitting them. So this really amplifies your burst. Superior Sigil of Concentration, that's optional. Don't worry so much if you don't want to use it. You can use a different kind of sigil that you can get a bonus when you switch. But I chose Concentration because for this build, there's a dependency on boon duration, which increases your crit chance and also your damage. So for my great sword, that's what I'm using. Sword, I'm using Sigil of Strength. Again, this one is optional. I kind of might use Sword and Shield, which I'll explain later, to kind of set up for my burst. So I typically hope that my sword can set me up with a few extra might stats, which I can use when I switch to my great sword in order to burst later. Shield itself, it doesn't really matter whether you want to use full Zerker or something that's more sustain oriented. And the reason why is because the shield is mainly a defensive weapon, and it's a weapon you use to use knockbacks. It's a great weapon to give yourself protection, and it's also a great weapon to give yourself knockbacks. And whenever you interrupt an opponent, you can steal up to 3 boons. And there are times where this single interrupt can finish the fight for you. For runes, I'm using Superior Rune of Fireworks. And my Superior Rune of Fireworks is, it's quite simple. You need boon duration to deal sustained damage in this build. You need power. You really have to double down on power now because you can't depend on a passive boon like Retaliation, which can do damage while you're taking damage. So you have to be actively dealing damage in order for this build to be effective. The movement speed, might stacks, the fury, and the vigor for the first 6 seconds of combat is fantastic. It just gives you a little bit of a head start, and the cooldown 20 seconds is not such a long time. So This is a fantastic rune to use with Guardian because it also gives you 25% movement speed, which in my opinion is a requirement for Guardian. It's not a very mobile class, and you have to kind of build around that in order for it to be effective. So that is the gear, that is the runes, that's a quick intro on the trinkets, and that is the weapon. The last thing that I would mention about the gear rollout is consider if Marauder weaponry is too easy for you, add some Zerker pieces. Because the Zerker pieces or Valkyrie pieces can really increase your damage output, especially if you're standing on top of an opponent and you're trying to finish them off. Those little extra stats actually scale quite a bit when we look at the traits. So let's move there next. So these are the traits I'm using. I'm using Radiance, I'm using Virtues, and I'm using Valor. Radiance is primarily where a lot of the damage modifications are coming from. Blind is an amazing skill. When you use your F1 ability and you can blind your enemy at the same time, and you get a light aura which reduces condition damage, you know, even prior to resolution, you would have this light aura which would protect you from conditions. So removing retaliation and gaining resolution didn't actually improve this build, but it's better than nothing, and blind for this trait is amazing. This 3-second blind will allow you to do damage when you switch to your greatsword, which I'll explain a bit in a minute. I am using Healer's Resolution, and the reason why is because it gives you a bit of counter pressure. I'm using Litany of Wrath, so you gain a bit of health based on the damage that you deal. It uses Healer's Resolution, it actually increases your damage, so you do more damage and you can heal more. Retribution is an amazing ability. So while I have Resolution, so again, it kind of works with Healer's Resolution, or it hurts when it also works when I use my F1 ability, because when I activate Virtue of Justice, I get Resolution, and my boon duration gear will give me some time where I can deal extra damage every time I have Resolution. And when I have Resolution, it also increases my critical hits. So this is where more pieces of Berserker or Valkyrie gear would really scale between this trait line here, where Resolution increases your damage, and you get might stats, and you get more critical chance. So highly advise it if you don't have already. Adjust the gear so it works well with this trait line. Virtues is also a fantastic trait line. You get additional boons whenever you use your virtues. It also reduces the cooldown. For the first line of traits, you can really use Unscathed Contender, so you do more damage while you have Aegis. Or you can use Resolute Subconscious, which basically gives you some boons whenever you get disabled. I chose this one because in World vs. World, there's a lot of dazes, knockbacks, and stuns. Sometimes when it happens to you, having an Aegis that blocks the next attack, which could be a burst, can really save your life. Not to mention it gives you resolution, so if they get close to you, you can counter pressure. This next trait line here, you can pick one of two. Okay, you can pick Inspiring Virtue, or you can pick Absolute Resolve. It doesn't really matter, but my preference is Inspiring Virtue. And the reason why is because if I still had Retaliation, I would use this because it would heal me and I'll be a bit tankier. However, in today's world, if you don't do damage in this Core Guardian class, you're going to be taking damage. So I actually double down on damage. So I use my F1 ability, I get resolution, I get crit chance, and I also get extra damage from Retribution, and I get the extra damage buff from Inspiring Virtue. This is like a ×4 damage modifier, which you can enhance with your gear to give you more critical damage. So that is where a lot of the burst potential comes from here. And what usually happens is when you hit someone that hard, they get scared and they start running. So that's where you can turn the tide of a duel or a fight. And for the last piece, I use Indomitable Courage. I don't use Permeating Wrath because this is not a condition build. I don't use Battle Presence because I have to sustain myself in some points, and I don't plan on running with a Zerg the whole time. So I use Indomitable Courage, and the reason why is obvious. The stability. Sometimes you get knocked down, and you have to trigger this in order to deal your full burst. Not to mention, with your F3, you also get protection, you get stability, and you get resolution. So virtues with Radiance really increase your damage output, and it keeps you standing so you can deal the damage. And the last piece of the traits is Valor. And why we use Valor is simple. Valor is great for sustaining during fights. You get Aegis when you get struck below a threshold. So you fall under 50%, somebody hits you with a burst, Aegis can kind of negate that for you. Works really well. I use Smiter's Boon because this cures conditions. We are in a meta right now where there's a lot of condition builds, so this is extremely handy. So it kind of scales with your current heal where you can counter pressure and you can remove conditions at the same time. Protection, whenever you use Aegis or whenever you block an attack, so that kind of scales with your passive here every 30 seconds where you get stunned or dazed or knocked back, you get free Aegis. And it also scales with your health when it falls below 50%, and that also gives you Aegis. So when you get Aegis, you also get protection. For this trait line here, you can use, because we are using a shield, you can actually use Stalwart Defender. It can give you a little bit more toughness. And a reduction in cooldown will really help as well too, especially when you want to do more knockbacks, or especially when you want to give yourself protection and Aegis, which scales with your current trait line. But I am using Strength in Numbers because sometimes you support your team. But for the most part, when I switch to Greatsword, if I were to use Stalwart Defender and I switch to Greatsword, I'm actually weaker and I can take more damage while I'm trying to burst. Which is why I pick Strength in Numbers, because during the combat, I'll have that defensive buff whether I'm in Greatsword or whether I am in Sword Shield. And lastly, of course, gain might when you block attacks. So when you block with Aegis, you gain might, you gain protection, and you can block the attacks as well too. And the last, Monk's Focus, will help me leverage my meditations to heal, to give me more fury for more critical damage and crit chance. And it also helps me remove conditions. So this is a very sustained focused trait line, and virtues and radiance is my offensive trait lines. Okay, now that we've talked about gear and traits, I will move us over to how to use. Virtue 1 is for damage. It also helps you with sustain because the blinds keep them from counter pressuring you. You have Virtue of Resolve, which heals you, reduces condition damage, gives you some regeneration, and also the Resolution helps you with counter pressure and sustaining condition damage as well. And then you have Virtue number 3, which is Virtue of Courage, which gives you Aegis, protection, stability, and resolution. So again, this is something that protects you and also helps you with counter pressure, and it breaks stun and gives you stability. This is an amazing ability because all three abilities are also instantaneous casts, so they are high impact skills. And now let's talk about our Sword 1 weapon set. So our first weapon set is Sword and Shield. We're using Sword 2 to blind and build boons. So we're using blind. It's going to give us fury. My sigil will help me build might while I crit. And then I have number 3, which is defensive and offensive. It can block projectiles, and it also helps me deal counter pressure. Shield 4 is a defensive move. It gives me Aegis, protection, and it does very minor damage. Shield 4 is an amazing ability. It not only heals you if you tap it twice, like this. It does knockbacks. So using the sigil I'm using, sigil of absorption, when I knock them back, I actually gain their boons. It can affect up to 5 targets, and it can block projectiles. So also, again, another amazing ability. Also high impact. On my greatsword, the combination that you want to use in this one is you want to use ability 3 to leap. You want to cast your symbol of resolution. You're going to hit 5 to pull them in, blind, and then you can burst them here. For the skills that I'm using is Litany of Wrath. We have a lot of damage modifiers. So Litany of Wrath will heal me a percentage of the damage that I deal. So you always want to be close in doing damage to this, because your damage is your sustain on this build. Stand Your Ground is an amazing ability as well. It breaks stun, it gives you stability, and the resolution also helps you with counter pressuring. Judge's Intervention is also an amazing ability. You're going to find when you play this build, people are going to start running from you. So when they run from you, one thing that you can do is you can cast 5, teleport, pull them in, and then burst after you blind them. Greatsword 3 is an offensive and defensive move as well, because Greatsword 3 can also blind your opponents. And for each opponent you hit, so you can hit up to 5 targets, you can heal about 1,000. One very nice combination that you can use is you can tap 5, teleport, pull them in, hit 3, blind, and then Greatsword 2 and finish them off. Contemplation of Purity is a panic button, so it works as a stun break, and it also works as a healing ability. And it also converts, and this is the best part, converts all conditions on you onto boons. So this works very well, especially when someone converts all of your boons into conditions. You can convert them back into boons. And the last ability is Renewed Focus, which is probably one of the best skills that Guardians have. It basically makes you invulnerable for about 3 seconds, and then it recharges your virtues. So if you're getting pressured hard, you can always use Renewed Focus, and then immediately when they're close to you, you can hit your F1 to blind them. Pulse, and then counter pressure. That is the introduction on the skills that I'm using. Let's transition over to see how we use them. So how to use this build is pretty simple. The way it would work is you want to use your sword to set up the burst for your greatsword. So the way to do that is I'm going to hit 2, 3, Aegis, knockback. Now I'm going to change weapon, blind, 4, and 2 in order to burst. Activate your F3, which will give you protection and stability, and you can finish the stomp. There are ways to vary the build itself. For example, when you hit 2, 3 to bait out a dodge, Aegis and a knockback to interrupt while you change weapons, you can also hit 3, hit 4, and then hit 5. So that way you have them hooked. Blind while you do the burst, pull them in to interrupt, and you can also finish.